A warm welcome, everyone, to the session of Shaping the Future of AI. My name is Alexander Illich. I'm leading the AI Center of ETH Zurich, and I'm joined here by an amazing group of panelists, which I would like to introduce to you in a minute. What you have seen, obviously, is that AI is something that has been around for many, many decades, but we feel we're in a phase of a very rapid acceleration. It has been around from the 1950s, but suddenly, we see different areas where it was like, okay, this is something where for sure humans will always be better. We took that with chess, said, okay, suddenly we got beaten by an AI, then, well, there was an easy game. Let's take something more difficult, yeah? Let's take something like Go. It's impossible for machines to do it. Suddenly, again, humans got beaten in this game. And then it continues on and says, okay, but it's for game, you can never be something that influences research and breakthroughs. And then we saw AlphaFold coming along, also helping to accelerate the world further in this. So we see then suddenly ChatGPT appearing, which basically leads us from a paradigm shift from before, where we thought, okay, maybe everyone needs to become a programmer and learn programming to leverage computers and machines, and suddenly we're in a phase where English has become more or less one of the most prolific programming languages, or whatever a normal language is. And this has sparked a number of ideas and also the feeling that we're in this path of exponential acceleration. It's not a phenomenon that's only locally, it touches all different places in the world, transcends the different national borders, but also cultural borders. And currently we have a few players which seem to have a very strong concentration in a few places. And the question is, where does this go next, obviously? So I would like to introduce the panel that is sitting here with me. Let's maybe start on your left-hand side, first with Alessandro Corioni, representing a little bit the business and international side. So you're the head of the IBM Research Lab in Switzerland, but also vice president in IBM for Europe and in Africa. And then Sylvie Delacroix, professor for ethics and law, University of Birmingham, and also with the Alan Turing Institute. Then Pascal Fung, professor at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and also director of the AI Research Center. And last but not least, Amandeep Gill, who's the tech envoy of the UN Secretary General. So I'm excited to have a number of different perspectives here on board, and I would like to start with a few initial statements, and then we can take it over after a panel discussion here, also for questions with the audience. So let's kick it off. Amandeep, in July, the UN Secretary General Guterres said that the United Nations could play a major role and made a very strong case for fostering this international cooperation. Can you share a little bit how that actually came to be, and what do you see the role of this going forward?
Thank you, Alex. And there is an existing foundation of work at the United Nations, the UNESCO AI Ethics Recommendation, the ITU's AI for Good meetings, the work being done on lethal autonomous weapon systems in Geneva. That's not only AI, but a large chunk is there. And the Secretary General has been, since his first mandate, very focused on the two aspects of this. One is the misuse, the risks and the challenges now, medium term into the future, but also the misuse side of it, which is not missing the opportunity that AI offers to accelerate innovation for the SDGs and to bridge the last mile gap in terms of sustainable development. So this comes on top of that. And I think the moment today is very interesting. You have this proliferation of initiatives, a good proliferation. Yeah. There is the UK AI Summit coming up. I was in Kyoto. There is the G7 Hiroshima process, which is launching these guiding principles and a code of conduct, the White House commitment, the EU AI Act, legislation, the Brazilian Parliament, a number of these. So the UN is ideally placed to go beyond these small groupings to a more universal, authoritative setting, inclusive setting, and build some connective tissue around these approaches so that the 160 odd countries who are just watching this as if it's a fast train moving in front of them, they can have more agency over this powerful technology. They can own this up for themselves. And the SGE has announced an advisory body on AI, a global multi-stakeholder advisory body, which will be coming together this month as a first step on that process to build a global scientific consensus on the risks and the challenges, also the opportunities and the enablers, and then to come out with some recommendations to governments on how can we get this right.
Just one maybe follow-up question to that. With this acceleration, do you feel like we're fast enough to keep up with this at the moment?
I think we have to accelerate our responses as well. We have to accelerate two things. One is the international collaboration, transdisciplinary, transborder. And second, we have to accelerate the governance response. So we need more innovation on governance. We need more collaboration on governance so that we can stay in step with the technology and its outcomes. There will always be this pacing problem. But I think the time has come for governments and the private sector and civil society and independent experts to mobilize themselves more strongly.
Very good. Thanks a lot. So, Pascal, so you're a researcher, and basically you work a lot also on topics that are coming in the future. Like now we're in the phase of trying to digest a little bit what just happened, right? But can you share a little bit, what do you think we can anticipate for the next 5 or 10 years in that field? Will it continue in that pace, or do you see certain patterns also emerging there?
So let me spend a little bit of time on how we got here. So I'm a researcher primarily in conversational AI. That's been my field since 1988. I worked at Bell Labs and CNRS in France and somewhere in Japan and so on. So how did we get here? So as you said, the AI, this term has been around for decades, but what we have today did not come from that school of AI. It came from information theory, statistical modeling, and actually a lot of people who are active in AI today, we did not consider ourselves AI researchers for decades. So we worked on, as I said, statistical modeling, signal processing, pattern recognition, and so on. So, what happened is that we use those technology, use those kind of approach to solve AI problems. So my field is natural language processing, conversational AI. These are AI, traditional AI problems. Reasoning, planning, speech recognition, machine translation. These are traditional AI problems. But the approach that we have today came from a different, let's say, has a different genetics, okay, from the traditional approach. That's why the previous AI symbolic approaches have not gotten us to where we are. They came from the other tradition. So having said this, so why do I want to mention this? Is because nobody expected this, because people working in different disciplines and separately. And then somehow we came to the point where people from these different areas sort of were all trying to solve the same problem with different approaches. And some approach won. You know, it's not a competition, but that's how science is done. So some approach one, and people then gradually, some people just from different areas then converge into this approach. So today, deep learning, foundational models. There are always opposing voices from different approaches, other scientists, other engineers, or other linguists and so on, including some famous ones, saying that, oh, these models can never do A, B, and C. And they have always been proven wrong. So that's how science goes. That's how AI research goes. So I cannot tell you 25 years. What did you say? 25 years?
5 to 10 years.
Oh, yes.
25.
I cannot even tell you 10 years, but perhaps I can tell you where we are looking. So what are the new research areas that we have today that will lead to new results within 5 years? In AI today, 5 years is like a lifetime. ChatGPT didn't come out of nowhere. ChatGPT is a descendant of many generations of neural language models. Neural language model was invented for other purposes. So when it went to a certain, when the model went to above a certain size, there were these emerging capabilities that came out. So before these models, not ChatGPT, but before GPT-3, GPT-2, all these models, we used to make them for a specific purpose. We make a machine translation system that translates. We make a speech recognition system that recognizes speech. Computer vision, they all were specific AI systems that do specific tasks. They can do a fantastic job surpassing humans. AlphaFold does not do what AlphaGo does, right? So, but these foundational models, what came about is that, what emerged is that they were not trained to do anything particular, but they were able to learn from everything under the sun to do almost anything you prompted to do. Almost anything you prompted to do. Because there were a lot of people who are saying it cannot do this and that. And I would challenge them to change their prompts. Very often today, you think it cannot do something is because you don't know how to prompt. All right? So that's not just the language models, but also the diffusion models, the image generation models. That people say, oh, it can never draw like an artist. It can if it's prompted by an artist. All right? So this is the dawn of a new era. I hate using terms from science fiction. I always say you need to separate science fiction from science. And many of us had never thought we would see this in our lifetime. But I'm here to tell you, we are at the beginning of a new era. Some people call this artificial general intelligence. I will call it, I don't know what to call it, but this is the new frontier models that's able to learn from everything under the sun and do things that we didn't make it to do. And we are not done discovering its capabilities. We actually have no theoretical understanding of the boundaries, capabilities of these models, which is an area that we want to research, we are researching on, to understand these models almost like a scientific phenomenon. We do not have a theoretical grasp on what they can do. So that's a research area. I would imagine that when we understand it better, we will be able to do more things. Now, another thing, the trend that's going is that the models are becoming more multimodal, meaning that you hear about language models, you hear about diffusion and image generation models. We'll combine them now. So there are models that learn from image, video, audio, everything. And it's learning, and it will have continuous learning. So we're becoming more and more powerful. Because there are things, like humans, we learn things a multimodal way, with multiple signals from the physical world. And another trend, I think is even more exciting for me and probably more scary for some people, is that we're putting them into robots. So again, robotics has been a field that's separated from AI, that's been based on other kind of approaches. But today, we're going to marry the foundational models with robotics. So what are we going to do with them is that I think once we have these foundational models in these robots, the robots will go and learn by itself. Continuous learning, embodied learning, continuous learning from the physical world. So people who are worried about data, training data, we need to know that in the future, when these robots go out and learn, we actually don't know what data it's going to learn from. Just like a human being, what do I learn from? I learn from everything. You can't really define what I'm learning from. Could be conversation with another person. So these robots, machines could be learning from each other. They could be learning from humans. They could be learning from the physical world. So that's the future we need to be prepared. Another important trend is that we're working in research very actively to align AI models with human values. So you hear a lot of, all these ethics principles, guidelines, and so on. How do we operationalize that? It's not just by governance. It's by the time they produce something and you're looking at the output, sometimes it's too late. What we need are human value aligned, self-regulating AI models. So it knows what it should and should not do in a way that we explicitly tell it. So there's got to be models that need to be more explainable, more transparent, and more aligned with human values. And these are not abstract concepts. These are actual research topics in AI today. So people are actively working on how to make these models more transparent, more controllable, more aligned with human values. You might have heard about reinforcement learning with human feedback. That's sort of a patch today. There will be other approaches come out that are more rigorous, more controllable, more transparent. so that we can see these models and we can tell it what to do.
Perfect.
So that's the trend.
Perfect. I think that's a great glimpse to see what potential you see, and you're very passionate about it. I think we had some very good segues now, maybe into discussion, Sevi, related to your part, like Article 7 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone should be able to participate, enjoy the benefits of science and culture. How should we view this in the age of generative AI, and maybe also with a little bit of respect where this could go next?
Yeah, so you might be surprised to hear right now about the human right to access culture and science, etc. This is Article 27 of the Human Rights Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. Now, why this right has actually not made the headlines until very recently. It's been taken for granted. And it's easy to take for granted. Why? Because you could say, well, it's been doing quite well recently. Yeah, thanks to the Creative Commons and open source movements, millions of people have put their creative works online, openly accessible, right? Now, none of the generative AI tools that make the headlines today would have been possible without access to this high-quality open content, okay? And yet, very few of those tools respect the reciprocity expectations, without which basically the Creative Commons movements become completely unsustainable. Now, some of you in this room will be familiar with the link between sustainability issues on one hand and reciprocity expectations. And that's typically raised in a different context. Take water, for instance. Yeah? Few today would dispute the extent to which the human right to water is only possible if reciprocity expectations are imposed on the economic exploitation of rivers. Okay, that's a given. And it has led to important water law reforms across the world today that aim to empower river-dependent communities. Well, I would argue that much the same applies to the right to access culture. Yeah, this is a very interesting parallel between the right to access water and the right to access culture. There are important differences, but basically, we could learn a thing or two from those water law reforms. And the key element that we're missing today is this bottom-up dimension, the need to empower groups, communities that are dependent, in this case, not on water, but on data. Now, what does that mean? Well, it basically means that we need to start asking ourselves questions like, can today's data needs be met within ecosystem limits? We're not used to thinking like that. But actually, it puts a very interesting light on current top-down regulation. Take the EU AI Act. Yeah. It has recently introduced in its proposed framework very important transparency obligations. Pascal was talking about transparency. It's absolutely crucial if we stand a chance of keeping these technologies at our service effectively, rather than the other way around. Yeah, transparency, audit possibilities, etc., are, I think, a cornerstone of any attempt to regulate AI. And yet, the EU Parliament is currently divided between groups of people who think that it's okay to invoke IP exceptions to basically shield yourself against transparency obligations, and another group that thinks it's not okay. This is a live political issue. And I want to flag it in relation to this human right to access culture, because we can't afford to be passive here. This issue, I think, is critical, and it's a mistake to think that it's just a technical legal issue that you can leave to lawyers. It's not. Yeah, it's an issue that we should all be taking very seriously. So that's what I want to finish on, is basically wake up to the fact that today there's a human right that was taken for granted for a long time, the human right to access culture, that's become very salient. And it can wake us up to really important questions in the way we regulate AI today. So I'll finish on that.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So just to clarify, if I understood it correctly, so one thing that I believe I heard is that you see a little bit of a different perspective than instead of like just looking at one company and making a decision on that part, to have more ecosystem view of this mutual obligations and rights, which you feel is not strongly reflected
Exactly.
in current things like the AI Act?
Because, of course, we have a tendency now to think about, say, the many artists whose works have been ingested by generative AI tools. Yeah, that has made the headlines. But actually, when it comes to data, we are all generators of data, right? And so there's a you could call it a political dimension that's been missing from the conversations we've had so far. A lot has been said about privacy, protection of privacy, but little or too little has been said about data as a tool for political empowerment. There are communities who want to be heard across the world and who see data as a way of gaining a voice, of acquiring a voice. And in that context, especially think of those communities whose languages are currently at risk of disappearing. This is a very important time where we could develop kind of bottom-up data empowerment infrastructure that enables those communities to pull together on their own terms the data they need to build things like generative AI tools.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you very much. Would move over briefly to you, Alessandro, so more towards the industry perspective, but I think you're also someone who thinks very strongly in ecosystems. So how do you see from your side the role in this collaboration, in this, what can you actually do and contribute to this broader dialogue?
Thank you. So look, let me reframe a little bit the topic, right, to get there. And I do believe that we have to demystifying a little bit what is happening to become pragmatic and then being very objective and taking the right decision to maximize the positive impact of this new AI, because it's a new AI, while we control the risk. Yes, what we see today, what everybody is touching, is these generative powers that we have seen in language, in images, and in other stuff, right? And that is really, really outstanding. But behind this, there is a set of technology developments that made this possible. And that's this technology development that are going to bring a broader impact, a larger impact to AI. Why? Because what has happened is that we went from the past 10 years with supervised learning and deep learning methods in which, in order to create a model, as was said, we needed to have an enormous amount of data. We needed to annotate this data. So you had a lot of human involved to do this work, right? To then fit a model that could be used for a very specific task. That's what does mean. It means that in the business, in the real world, this model has been used only for tasks that were going to scale, right? So if I do image recognition and I do this in an airport, that goes to scale. So the investment that I've put to create the model pay me back and I have a return because it goes to scale. There are trillions of other use cases where AI could have made the difference, but it didn't do only because the return of investment was too small. Okay? Now, this new technology with self-supervised learning makes the return on investment and the time to create the models, one order of magnitude better. What does it mean? It means that AI is going to be infused on any process, on any business, on anything that we are doing. The positive impact while you do this is strongly amplified. But at the same time, all the problems that we have been discussing, in the past 10 years, about transparencies, about explainability, about data provenance, about bias, are amplified. With a single big foundation models, I can create very easily 100 of very specific models. If I have bias on this model, the models that I create, the small one, the 100s, will have the same bias. Everything on the problem side also that we had before is getting amplified. Mm-hmm. So,
and just maybe to jump on this very briefly, there has been an argument because the technology is so complex and the problems can be amplified, we have to trust a few companies which understand that very deeply to make basically the key decisions.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of one of the concerns that people have, that the role of the private sector is sometimes a little bit perceived as, okay, let's optimize the business case and let's use regulation also as a way to create a more isolated or even stronger monopolies in areas where we don't have it.
That is a very good point. And by the way, that is what is happening, right? So the world today is divided in two pieces. The one that say, look, we realize that these are so powerful, we didn't know before, so now that we do know it, right, we need to put a strong control, we have to license this technology, and only few companies can do it because they are the companies that were able to do it, so it's a fully closed world. That has its benefit, but do you really want to put in the hands of a couple of companies in the world the control of this type of things, question mark. The other thing is, let's try to be fully open, transparent. That is also a very, very positive, let's say, outcomes, because with transparencies, right, you can see, you can check the data, you can check the models, you can understand where things are not working, but you take away completely some sort of governance, right? So we do believe that probably these two opposite trends alone are not right, but the things is in the middle. And we, for example, do believe that we should not put any control on algorithms, but we should put regulations on the way the algorithms are used based on the risk of their used. Yeah, the algorithms, certain algorithms you develop a method can be used for certain application that has huge positive impact and zero risk. Okay, there are others that is the other way around, right? So a risk precision-based regulation is what we need to do. Second, in my opinion, in our opinion, we need to make anybody is creating or deploying AI accountable for the outcome of this. It's too easy to say, I create all this, then, it's you, user, that you are responsible for. The creators, they need to get some accountabilities. And on the last part, going back to what we were saying, in terms of development, we need to try to push, when I say development of the algorithm, as open as possible approach. If we put the right governance, an open approach, right, is the best one because it's the only one that gets transparencies. And we, as a technology provider, can help, by the way, even using AI, to create instruments that facilitate the governance of these models. Everything is too fast to simply say, I create, after 5 years of negotiation amongst all the parties, some sort of rules, and these are valid for the next 10 years. When you finish to create the rules, they are already too old.
Very good. So we have now a first impression from all of the panelists here. So I would encourage you to open it up more also for a discussion amongst each other. If you feel a point you want to jump in. Pascal, you very strongly reacted while Alessandro was talking. Maybe you want to share a little bit what went for you ahead.
What went through my head? You want me to provide a chain of thought? Okay. So. First of all, about open science. Science has, in AI at least, what we consider AI today, it's always been sort of open. We've always published, but more recently, it's just this trend of open sourcing. So we share code, we share data set. This is a more, like in the last 10 years, new development of sharing code and sharing data set. And in fact, without this open science, without this kind of sharing of code, we would not get the models we have today. Because the transformer was invented actually in Google, they shared the code, so OpenAI, other companies took it, and other researchers took it, and they developed certain things. And then they based on this research here, and they developed something else. And this is also true for between international organizations. Nothing is purely invented by the Americans, or by the Europeans, or by the Chinese. Everything has been a collaborative effort of the entire scientific community. So this trend, we cannot stop it, and we should not stop it. And I don't know what you mean by holding us accountable. And then you say, algorithm development should be okay. So you're making me both scared and skeptical at the same time. But as I mentioned in the earlier panel that we do in the scientific community, the AI community, in different professional organizations, we have our ethics committee, we have our ethics review guidelines. They're not perfect, it's a mess. Because it's kind of a democratic process, right? You know, these committees are composed of researchers in these areas from around the world, and we represent different voices, and there's an argument, and we try to move forward. So it's not a clear, you know, path that, you know, we go from A to B, but we go like a little bit like this, a little bit back, and we listen to each other, we debate, and we go a little bit like this. Today, you know, the biggest debate in the area is not about how we should, you know, what kind of research we're doing, but like very philosophical debates. And there's some of us think it's a waste of time to have those debates with people who don't really know the technology, and some of us think that it's a waste of time to debate with people who know the technology but do not understand the philosophical side of it. I tell my PhD students, you're getting a PhD, which is a doctorate of philosophy, but there's very little philosophy in our training of our PhD students, and particularly we have to. So all my PhD students, in their PhD thesis, they need to have a philosophical discussion, references, and so on, about the implication of what they do. Also, in addition to that, very often what the PhD students produce today can be obsolete in 3 months, right? 6 months. So then the implication is, what are you doing this? What is the long-term implication of your thesis? We also ask ourselves about our research, our publications. What is the long-term impact? Not just, you know, potential risk, but like why are we doing this? So we're asking a lot of why rather than what. Because if we just focus on what, it can be obsolete, it can be meaningless, and so on. And I want to talk about something about risk assessment. If we can assess the risk, there won't be risk. That's all I'm saying. So if we can quantify, we can predict the risk, then there won't be any risk. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. I'm thinking from the model point of view. So for example, today's model, we cannot use uncertainty measures. I won't go into details. So there are a lot of traditional risk assessment methods that we cannot use. You might be thinking, how come GPT-4 doesn't tell you when it doesn't know things, right? Why doesn't it tell you, oh, actually, I'm not sure? It does now, but this is not the result of its internal model. It's a result of the human feedback loop, okay? So there is no, I mentioned earlier, we don't have a scientific grasp about the capabilities of this model. So we don't have a scientific grasp of its risk in the quantifiable way. But people are working on it. You know, that was what was going through my mind. I don't know whether it's coherent, but that was
That's good.
what was going through my mind.
Can I take it?
Yeah, of course.
I do agree 100% to what you said, but there is a big but. You know, there are things that we do know, for example, a priori, that we should not do because there could be have a big risk. A pharma company, when develop a new drug for Alzheimer, okay, for example, before, even if, you know, it can be life-saving, before putting this in commerce and sell, they have to do and go through a very serious list of tests and et cetera, to prove that it works, to prove. What happened with this first push of generative models is that something where people, yes, didn't know what could be the risk, was put in the hand of the full population, get a try, and then let's see if something bad happens. I know since the beginning that something bad could happen because this is transformational, you know? But it happened anyway.
So what I love, like, just a little bit more to unpack it is like, because for some people in the room there might be a contradiction. You were before advocating for, we need a lot more open source, we need to make the models more accessible, and at the same time you say, like, I don't know, IBM or private sector would be willing, like this would be like a self-commitment to say, like, we take the accountability for everything out.
No.
Did I understand that correctly?
No, there is no. You know, there is a big difference from. Also, when you develop a drug, you can do it if you have enough data. You know, you can do it in the open. But in spite of this, when the things get to be used, right, you go through a process to try to do things. The other thing that you have said, look, is the same thing. I do know a priori that if in my model, to train my model, I use all data that I can grasp without caring about copyright or data properties, I do know a priori that I'm doing something wrong with many risks for everybody's going to use. So there are certain risks that we can see in advance. Okay? There are others that I cannot predict, but you know, the right thing is, as we do in a very objective way in any science-driven scenarios, at a certain point you try to minimize the risk for what is your knowledge. You use it, you discover new risk, and then you correct. And that is why I said that the governance has to be done in a way that if you find this is something that is wrong, you can go back, try to understand why it was wrong, which are the data or the models that I've used that bring the things wrong, and eventually correct. You know?
So what I find interesting, just maybe one observation in between. I think like there was a lot of discussion about, you know, can models quantify their own uncertainty and how truthfulness and so on. But I think what Sylvie brought up is a point that it's much larger. It's not about the technical risk or capabilities of the model inside, but more aspects that need to be addressed on an ecosystem level. Because, you know, I believe that many of the developers, they think they do the right thing, but it seems like still this giving back and creating from culture and diversity, this is not happening automatically somehow. And I don't think there's any bad intent. So do I see this, do you share the observation that it's maybe sometimes a little bit too narrow, the conversation on like capabilities just on the technical side of a model?
I think it's too narrow and it's not pragmatic enough. I mean, I was listening to conversations now, and you know, why is the room full right now? I think it's because we all sense, there's a shared feeling that we are at a critical juncture when it comes to the development of those tools. Right, this is an important moment. Now, it's taken us centuries to come up with water law reforms. And in the meantime, we have heavily polluted rivers with people experiencing water scarcity across the globe, right? We don't have centuries to come on top of the technology we have today. We shouldn't forget that what powers it is data. Yeah, that shift of perspective means that, yes, it is absolutely critical that we address the various risks, known and unknown, of those technologies. There are many things I don't know. Yeah. But one of the few things I know is that we can't get on top of those risks and the opportunities, actually, that lay dormant today if we don't have concerted international action now. Private action on its own is never going to get us there. National agendas are all very good, but you know, they don't have borders, those risks. And so I'm hopeful. The reason I came today is because I believe that international action is not only needed, it's urgent, right? And I hope that one outcome of the conversation we're having today and the panel we have is that we can take a pragmatic stance, set aside all the unending conversations we could have about the risk we know about and the risk we don't know about, and the press loves to talk about existential risk, for instance. We have very present real risks today, yeah? And the only way we can address those risks is to actually build infrastructure whereby we, A, bring together the community that depends and that generates the data for these tools, and B, where we build windows for experimenting and auditing these systems in a transparent, publicly accountable way, right? So that means collaboration between private actors and public actors. There's no question about that in my mind, and that also means international fora, okay? And I really hope that we can actually stop talking soon and get action on these fronts.
I think Pascal has a hot pursuit. That's why the room was full, because Pascal is here. Go ahead.
So I do want to say that, contradicting myself, we do benchmarking. But to me, that is the fundamental. It's part of the scientific method. So any science, any model we publish, any methodology that comes with benchmarking. Otherwise, it's not valid. But benchmarking, so we do use benchmarking to test the safety, the toxicity, and so on. But I want to caution people that benchmarking is a proxy. So we use some kind of design set to test whether it's biased and so on. They're always just proxies. As I said, we still don't have the theoretical grasp of how complete, like how the coverage of this benchmarking. So benchmarking is an active research area, again. And until we can understand these models completely, we cannot have a full grasp of its potential risk at the model level. Obviously, we can predict risk at the outcome level. That's what we're trying to do, right? So in medical domain, you know, if you use ChatGPT and you ask it to provide medical information, it will refuse to give you any answer today. And in some other domains on. So in different industry, there are existing industry regulations in pharmaceutical, in health, in the financial industry. So I think those are guardrails we have right now in terms of guarding the output. So the lawyer who used ChatGPT to come up with precedents, that person violated the practice in his profession. It's not the problem of ChatGPT or not ChatGPT. So all this, we have those industry-specific guardrails, and then the granularity or the resolution of governance. So when it comes down to the actual model, that's what I was talking about. We don't know the actual quantifiable risk theoretically, like with 100% confidence. We don't have that. But we can do all these steps from benchmarking, mitigation at the data level, at the outcome level, system outcome level, software engineering level, and so on to govern and to mitigate risk. I agree.
I'm a deep first,
Right.
and then
So I think there's several interesting strands in this conversation. So I think on the risk side, we need to be careful that depending on the risks we emphasize, there are choices that flow from it.
Yeah.
Also in terms of business models. If you're looking at the now risks, then probably they can be handled better with more open source work, where you have more researchers looking at what's happening, biases in the data sets, for instance. But if you're thinking more about long-term risks, then probably the direction is fewer holders of technology, like what happens with certain kind of technologies we've seen in the past. Nuclear, for instance, where you have choke points, licensing, even intangible controls, who has the model weights, who doesn't, etc. So there are choices. So I think this risk conversation has to be apolitical, has to be scientific, has to be informed by transdisciplinary perspectives, and it cannot be allowed to be the monopoly of only a few actors. And that's why the UN's role is so important. That we can bring people across the world and develop a scientific consensus on what the risks are without falling into these artificial dichotomies, short-term risks, long-term risks. There are medium-term risks, shifts in the job market, reinforcement of inequality, the deepening of the existing digital divide, some of the societal implications. If we have a proliferation of synthetic relationships, what does it mean for the fabric of our societies, particularly the younger people as they grow into this AI-rich world? So I think that's the risk dimension we need to look at. The uncertainties, when there is the probability dimension and there is the impact dimension. If the impact is very high, sometimes there's an emotional charge around it, and we tend to overestimate the probability. So again, we need a kind of a reasoned, deliberate conversation around it. Now, coming to the aspect of responsibility and accountability that Alessandro raised, I think we need to rely on existing foundations. And this is, Sylvie, your point as well. In this city, we know the importance of the human rights, humanitarian law-based approach. So that's an existing foundation. And no matter how fast technology moves, from the time of the crossbow to, mines and other conventional weapon systems, now to, these lethal autonomous weapon systems, we have a touchstone. thou shall not target civilians, thou shall do certain things and not do other things. So there are existing commitments which we can use to enforce accountability. There are at the same time frameworks that allow us to be more positive, more inclusive, and I'm thinking of the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030 framework, because you also need to put purpose behind AI. What are we doing this for? Is it to make a lot of money from a lot of customers, or is it to potentially solve societal problems at scale? And again, if you have that conversation, you'll realize that some of the technologies being developed today may not be suited for that. So, which brings me to my last point about having a sober assessment of, again, yes, there are breakthroughs happening, but really, what are the capabilities there? Are we really talking AGI? And it's like, if you're working out, you're building the biceps, but your lower limbs are not strong enough. So LLMs are a bit like that. With brute force, we've got to this point that we are at today. But who knows? We may, when I was studying engineering, symbolic systems, Lisp, and all those things, they had a different kind of potential. And who knows? We may not be able to solve the hard problems in artificial intelligence with the current paradigm. And so we need to think a little more carefully about what's the technology offering us, and is this a solution looking for problems and justification because there is money around it, or we need to put more research and development effort, investments into areas that could have more significance for societal problems.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, thanks very, very much for that, broadening this perspective. I would love to also use the time a little bit for some questions from the audience. Please raise your hands, and then we need to send someone with the microphones, otherwise we don't hear. I think let's start up here in the front. Please briefly state your name and then the organization, if possible. Oh, someone is coming. Yeah, perfect.
Andre Villarreal, Universe AI. I'm a PhD from EPFL in Management of Technology. Thank you very much for this very exciting exchange. I also happen to have worked with international development, bilateral development with the Japanese in South America. And I've been touching base on AI and what's happening over there. And I felt the very last aspect that Amandeep touched upon seems to better reflect what the worries are thinking 10 years into the future, in that beyond the technological aspects of frontier, AI technology that is only available for, billion-dollar budgets in California, people are worried about the accessibility, as Sylvie was saying, as in very small communities are not represented, their culture is not represented, their language is not represented, nothing is represented about them. And yet, like Alessandra was saying, we're building on these frontier models to provide them these AI services. But I want to move on to the other two dimensions, which are the economic. Economic dimension is, we're hearing ChatGPT Plus costs $20. Microsoft 365, $30 per month per user. This is way beyond what people can afford in most countries around the world, let alone businesses to run using these technologies. Which brings me to the third point, which is political, in the sense very pragmatic too, a worry about sovereignty. Are we going to be captive, like Gaza is currently being cut off electricity, water, and so of intelligence for being able to work as a society if we are in a country where we don't actually own frontier models to help run internally our society. So thank you.
Very good question.
Good. No questions so far, but many statements. Does anyone, I think very valuable content. Thanks a lot for that. Does anyone want to briefly react on this,
So
Alessandro?
I totally agree with the sovereignty of large language models.
Okay.
We have initiated open science collaboration in the sense that we do not, I believe not just that every language community should have their own foundational models, but also they need to have the expertise. So it's a deeper topic than that. So today, if you use GPT-4 or whatever, you will encounter the values. Okay, will tell you this is sexist, this so on and so forth. And we're working with I'm working with the Indonesian students and Indonesian researchers in Indonesia to use open source large language model from Meta. It's not advertisement, but it's open source. And then fine tune it for Indonesian language so that the Indonesian community, not just they have the model, but they have the know-how. So I consciously train Indonesian PhD students to do this. And I really believe that we cannot have this kind of, one way, not just the model, but also the values. So today, ROHF gives us values, predominantly North American liberal values. And when you fine-tune it with Indonesian data, we actually encounter a lot of problems because this has become what some philosophers call value imperialism. All right, so I believe in those values, but should I then impose this, not just my model, but my values to those communities? It's a very, very deep and not just interesting, but very critical topic. So thank you for bringing that up.
So,
We need a microphone up here, and then you have time in the meantime to respond on this.
yeah, I do believe that what you said is really super important, and that is why I do hope that we have the courage. It's very difficult as a community to really push forward this open, real AI type of development across the globe. But you need to have not only development of algorithms, you need to have data, you need to have proper infrastructure to do it. Otherwise, it's only words. But I really do believe that's the way. If you go back in the past, it's a different thing. But think what happened with Linux and Linux Foundation. There was a time in which, that part was dominated by a couple of companies, and was the most important thing for computing and operative systems, and then evolved on something that has been open, democratized computing much faster, right, because it was open, and at the same time allow business to make money on top of it. So the two things can go together. But on the other side, look, there is no political meeting today, high-level meetings, in which AI and generative AI is not one of the first topics. It's being treated today as a very sensitive technology like military. Yeah? So on one side, that is what is happening. On the other side, it becomes something that is thought to be a super differentiator in terms of power for countries. So there is this, divergency between what we should do, what is going to happen, and probably both the things are going to happen at the same time.
Thank you. Question up here.
Thank you. I'm Denise Garcia, professor of international law at Northeastern University in Boston. I'm the author of a new book, The AI Military Race. And in the book that is coming up next month, I grappled with the questions of creating governance on military AI. And I would love to hear from the distinguished panelists, particularly Sylvie and Amandeep, about not only what's going on, what are your views on creating governance, not only for military AI, but of course AI in general, and you're obviously very well positioned to comment on that. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Denise, for that question. I think it also goes back to some of the discussion we had earlier on, things are moving so fast and the response takes so long. But I don't like the pessimism in that. I mean, otherwise it's a good statement to keep in mind that somehow, we don't have agency over this. It's something that's happening to us. Of course, we can catch up. We can make sure that we create frameworks that are responsive. So, for instance, there is a layer of governance that you can put in place at the international level. On the military applications, this means reaffirming existing principles of international humanitarian law, weapons reviews, practical issues like that. Those commitments are there, capturing them and putting them in a framework that makes sense in the AI context. Then you have other possibilities at the international level. As I mentioned, this advisory body is going to look at some of these issues, how the international community can at least keep things under watch on a regular basis, how the tech is moving, make sure that the vast majority of governments, and it's not only the global south, the global majority, but many, many developed countries are also bewildered about this. What's our place in this, food chain, the value chain? And these are conversations that North European countries are having today. So it helps them adapt their policy posture to what's happening. Then there is the important layer of national, regional regulatory frameworks, the EU AI Act, the Brazilian legislation, and so on, where you provide certainty, but also some guardrails for the business to innovate. And then there is the industry applications enterprise layer, where you can have standards, codes of conduct, but you can't just leave it to one layer and saying, this will be. And these three layers have to have a foundation, values, human rights, larger purpose. And that's how we can stay agile and stay flexible, not lose out on the innovation, but make sure that, as we are handling the risks and the challenges as they happen. This aspect of the inequities that's coming up, these are choices actually being made today by companies. If you are a company in the global south, do you rely on these services that are coming from some of these companies to resolve, let's say, through a chatbot, customer complaints about food delivery and so on? Or do I have a domestic modeler, and do I have the domestic data protection and data frameworks and data flows and the access to that private sector company's data that allows me to build those chatbots myself? So you don't want a repeat of the situation where there is again this massive transfer of wealth and you build new inequalities. And that will create resentment and a backlash on, for example, data hoarding, which is not good for the development of the ecosystem overall.
Maybe I'll just add quickly that I think this was, thank you, because I think in answer to your question, I would say one of the problems as I perceive them is that we're stuck in a fairly split conversation where there's people who think about risks importantly, and they will think of those in terms of, what precedents do we have, like say atomic energy is an example of a kind of development that emerged which we had to regulate given the very considerable risks that can accrue, right? And then there's, on the other hand, conversations about inequities and sustainability. And at the moment, they are very much split. Yeah, and also it tends to be related to those people who worry about data and those people who worry about the models as they exist already, right? And I very much hope that we can get to a point where we can bring those two kind of spheres of conversation together, because I don't think we stand a chance if we split them. So I really hope that we can have, just like, in the UN, we have a water agency that worries about water, but it's typically a sustainability kind of discourse. And we also have agencies that worry about, say, the risks related to things like atomic energy, right? But these don't need to think too much about sustainability, typically, right? And so AI brings us, among the many challenges it's facing us with, is the fact that we have to conjoin two very different sorts of problems. One is really encapsulated under the umbrella of sustainability and equity issues, and the other is like these very considerable risks that we need to approach in the longer term as well. And we are not used to having to link those two very different perspectives together when regulating, in this case, a technology.
Good. We have time for one last question, maybe here in the front. Can you help? Yeah. Okay. It's okay. Take two questions
I guess.
here and here.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This is a very interesting discussion that we're having. I have a comment more on concerted international action, even though coming after Denise, we're going in the same direction of governance. I'm Silvia Mercogliano. I work for the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. But I think we all are agreeing here on the need for the necessity for new governance models. Whether these governance models be open, closed, or in between, that's all to be determined. But governance is political. So, Pascal, I would add the political dimension to the scientific and the philosophical. And this is a governance that will need to be beyond the national borders. This is really a way transboundary. It needs to be done at the global level, to echo what Amandeep was also saying. And it's a discussion and an action that will need to be taken that will have also its difficulties, because it will need to bring together the various actors, and there are many, we see them represented here, from the scientific community, university, industry, states, governments. But at the same time, it's something that we have done, that we have experience in doing, maybe not to such large scale, but we have done it. Amandeep was referring to all the work in arms control, for instance. There are always at least two dimensions, the technical and the political in the conference room. And by technical, it's not just the scientific, but it can be the legal, it can be the computer science, it can be, depending on the topic. So this all can be done. And I was a bit intrigued, Alessandro, when you mentioned the accountability of the developer. And as a non-scientific practitioner, as you may have inferred, I was wondering, can the developer of an algorithm really be legally accountable if we are talking about generative AI mechanisms? I do not know whether that's possible at the technical level. That would be interesting. And to conclude and to echo also Sylvie on the importance of transparency. But I will cut it short so that somebody else can also talk.
Yeah, maybe just a brief response.
One very brief response. I said of the creators and deployers, not developers. That is a different thing, right? And it's not only in their hands, but they have to have some accountability. You cannot see me, delegate this down to everybody else. Yeah.
Good. We're running a little bit over time, so I want to give the chance to the panelists for one last statement or call for action. So what I take away with it is I think there's a very high willingness to change something. I think that we have agency, that there's motivation from the different areas. I think it's necessary, like one entity cannot solve it alone. So I would like to hear, what do you want to leave the audience with? Do you have a specific call for action? Maybe keep it brief for the sake of time. I learned a lot from the panel today and enjoyed it quite a lot. And let's start on the side with Amandeep and move on.
I think very briefly, we have to be proactive. We just can't sit back and let things happen to us. We have to reinforce international collaboration. Countries, regions have to come together to treat this as a global problem, a global challenge for humanity. And we have to be optimistic about governance. I think greater investment is needed there, but we need to approach this with a positive frame of mind. We can do this.
Perfect. Thank you. Pascal?
So I like to be a bit controversial. May I? So I hear a lot about the statement that AI poses existential threat to us. And my question to all of us is, what if it does? So it will be able to do everything humans can do and better in many areas. And this is the first time in human history we contend with another form of intelligence that in many ways surpasses us. It didn't just happen to us, we made it happen. But so what if it is a threat to us? How can we prepare ourselves for such threat? So how can we, so again, I want to say, why are we here? what are we doing as human beings? What do we want to leave as a legacy to our future generations, to our planet? We need to not just ask the AI systems the why, but also ourselves. Why? Are we just trying to make money? I hear a lot of talks about how to make money from these AI models. Frankly, I do not like to give those talks to tell people how to make money. It's not my business. What I care about is that how can we use this kind of intelligence to better humanity, to solve complex problems that we cannot solve alone, such as climate change, such as hunger, such as inequality, such as war and peace. How can we proactively use this kind of tool to help us solve our most complex problems? And this essentialist threat to humanity has always been humans, not machines. So let's think about how to use machines for peace, to better humanity in every way possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be quick. So tools have always changed their users. That's always been the case across history. So AI is no different in that respect. What's different is probably the scale and the speed of the change at stake, right? But what's also different, and people forget this, is that AI just doesn't emerge from nothing. AI comes from, basically, it's made possible by data, yeah? And actually, we forget the fact that a significant part of this data comes from us, from the data we leak on as we go about our daily lives, from the creative works we produce. And that makes a significant difference, because actually, it somehow gives us agency, each and every one of us, especially if we group together. If we create bottom-up data empowerment infrastructure, we can actually have more of a say in what kind of tool AI becomes and how we want to shape it to preserve what we deem to be important in our ways of life. And there'll be many answers to that. But that's the key. Is we need, without this bottom-up empowerment infrastructure, we don't have space for the kind of debate we need, the grassroots movements we need, to have the democratic dimension that needs to be much more salient in the regulation and future development of that tool.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, I do believe that since where humans exist, transformational technologies always had positive and negative effects, right, and outcomes. And more the technology is transformational, more these positive, utopistic, and negative dystopic scenarios become stronger, right? I do believe that we do have an opportunity now really to demonstrate that our brain is better than anything else, helping us to find a way to maximize the positive ones that could help to solve all the problems that we do have, right, and minimize the negative ones. It's a very good test to see if we are really better than machines.
Perfect. Good. I think that's a good closing word. Thank you very much for joining. Good. With that, we close the session, and thanks a lot for all of the interesting discussions and comments.